The message played on loop, my daughter's voice cold and sharp, saying if she tells anyone, you know what to do. Still, I stood barefoot on the kitchen tile, clutching the phone like it might shatter in my hand. As the hum of the fridge filled the silence, I realized it wasn't fear in my granddaughter's voice last week, it was warning. While the morning light hit the photo of us on the fridge, I felt every year I'd failed to see it. The same woman I once rocked to sleep had become someone else's nightmare. That's when I dialed the police, because love doesn't mean looking away. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. I was rinsing the last mug from breakfast, Sophie's favorite, the one with the chipped sunflower on the side, when my phone buzzed on the counter. A voicemail from Rachel. I dried my hands more from habit than urgency. Rachel rarely left voicemails. She preferred texts, short and sharp like instructions. I almost didn't listen, but something made me press play. 0:57, that's what it said, 57 seconds. The first sound was Rachel's voice, too loud, too close to the phone, angry. Get back in your room now. A pause. Then Sophie's voice, quiet, broken, a sound I hadn't heard before, not from her. I didn't do anything. You ruin everything, you always have, no one loves you, not even her. The words were fast, practiced, like they'd been said before, many times. The line went silent for a moment, then a low thud, maybe a hand hitting a table or a wall, then Chad's voice, muffled like he was standing in another room. Stop, Rach, come on. Another pause, a door slammed hard enough that the voicemail crackled, then nothing. I stood still, hand hovering over the sink, the cup half dry in the towel. My thumb shook as I hit replay. This time I listened slower, carefully. I'd counseled enough students in my years to know what to listen for, not just the words but what lived underneath them. The fear, the pattern, the weight. And I heard it. Sophie hadn't cried out like a child caught in trouble. It was the sound of someone used to swallowing their fear, of someone who'd learned not to argue, just to brace. When the message ended, I didn't gasp, I didn't scream or drop the phone. I just walked to the dining table, sat down and opened my journal. I wrote the time and date. I drew a line under it. Then I stood up, walked to my desk drawer and pulled out the old USB I used for photos and tax documents. I saved the voicemail onto it. Twice. I didn't call Rachel, I didn't call Sophie. Instead, I turned on the kettle, poured myself a cup of mint tea I wouldn't drink. Then I sat by the window, watching the wind rattle the dying leaves on the maple tree outside. Something inside me had settled, not in the way that means peace, but in the way you settle your shoulders before you lift something heavy. I didn't want to believe it, but I'd known pieces of it. I'd seen it in the way Sophie flinched when Rachel raised her voice at a waiter, in the way Chad always kept his eyes on the floor, in the way Rachel talked about Sophie like a burden disguised as a joke. I had always kept my distance. Rachel liked it that way. Boundaries, she'd say. What she really meant was control. But Sophie still looked at me like I was the one solid thing in a world she didn't understand. My phone buzzed again, another message from Rachel, just a text this time. Forgot to tell you, we might need you to watch Sophie again this weekend. She's being such a brat lately. I stared at it, then locked the phone and set it face down. It wasn't the first time she'd slipped, but it would be the last time I ignored it. I opened the drawer where I kept my files, old report cards, art projects, notes from teachers over the years. Somewhere in there, I knew, was a printout of the email I'd received from Sophie's third-grade teacher, the one who'd hinted at behavioral shifts at home. I found it, slid it into a manila folder, and added a label. Master's custody evidence. I knew the path I was about to walk wasn't going to be easy or quiet, but I'd spent a lifetime helping other people's children. This time, it was mine. As I shut the drawer, the front door creaked from the wind. Sophie's shoes were still by the mat, little canvas slip-ons, one toe starting to peel. And I knew without question who I'd be protecting. By the time morning light slid through the blinds, I hadn't slept more than an hour. The house felt too quiet, too brittle, like any sound might crack it in half. I moved through my routines carefully, brushing my hair, choosing a clean sweater, setting out food for the sparrows on the back deck. Every motion was deliberate, controlled. I needed control. At 8:03 a.m., I picked up my keys and the manila folder I'd labeled the night before and walked to the car. The frost on the windshield had started to melt into thin, clear streaks, but I could still see where my hands trembled as I scraped the glass. I told myself it was just the cold. The sheriff's station sat on the edge of town next to the community center and a shuttered hardware store that had been temporarily closing for 6 months. The parking lot was nearly empty. When I stepped out of the car, the air was sharp enough to sting the inside of my nose. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of burnt coffee and pine disinfectant. A receptionist looked up from behind the desk, blonde hair pulled tight, the fluorescent lights flickering slightly above her. "Morning, can I help you?" "Yes," I said, restraining my voice to something steady. "I need to speak with someone about a report regarding a minor." The word minor landed heavily between us. She glanced at the clock, then nodded toward a row of plastic chairs. "Someone will be right with you." I sat. The vinyl creaked. I kept the folder in my lap, fingers flattening its corners until they were rigid. I reminded myself not to apologize. It was an old habit, apologizing for taking up space. After several minutes, a door opened to my left and a woman in uniform stepped out. Short dark hair, expression clear and observant, not rushed or impatient. "Elaine Masters?" she asked. "Yes. I'm Deputy Dana McClure, let's talk." Her voice was calm, even-toned. She led me to a small interview room, brighter and cleaner than I expected. No two-way mirror, no intimidation tactics. Just a metal table, 2 chairs, and a box of tissues sitting dead center like a quiet prediction. I placed the folder gently on the table. She sat across from me, hands folded, posture attentive. "What brings you in today?" she asked. I unlocked my phone, pressed the screen, and slid it toward her. "There's a voicemail. It was sent by mistake." She put on headphones, pressed play, and listened without blinking, without moving, not even when the door slammed, not when Sophie cried, not when Rachel said those words. Her face stayed neutral, professional, but I saw the faint shift in her jaw, the subtle tightening around her eyes. When it ended, she set the phone down carefully, almost reverently, as though the recording itself were fragile. "You did the right thing coming here," she said. I swallowed. "You don't know how long this has been going on." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, not doubt, not disbelief, just invitation. I slid the folder across the table. Inside were printed emails from teachers, date-stamped photos of Sophie with shadowed eyes and thin arms, a counselor's note from elementary school, persistent anxiety, potential emotional instability in home environment, recommend continued monitoring. I didn't narrate or justify any of it, I simply let her look. Dana turned through each page slowly, absorbing, not reacting. When she reached the end, she took a breath, professionally measured but real. "We'll begin an investigation, quietly, discreetly," she said. "I'll start by contacting her school and reviewing prior mandated reports." My fingers tightened around the edges of the folder, even though it was no longer in my hands. "I don't want this to become a battle," I said softly. "Protecting a child isn't a battle," Dana replied. "It's a responsibility." Her certainty steadied something inside me. For a brief moment, I felt the floor beneath me solidify. She slid a business card across the table. "If anything else happens, or if anything feels off, call me directly." I nodded once. I couldn't find more words, not without letting something fracture in me that I wasn't ready to show. I stood, thanked her, and walked back down the hallway. My footsteps felt too loud, echoing against the tile. Outside, the cold air hit my face and brought a sting to my eyes I refused to let turn into tears. I walked to my car, sat behind the wheel, and stared straight ahead. My phone buzzed again, Monica calling, her name soft and familiar on the screen. I let it ring until it stopped. I wasn't ready to tell anyone, not yet, not until I knew Sophie was safe. I started the engine. The radio came on softly, some old folk song about rivers and endurance. I put the car in drive. As I pulled out onto the road, the phone buzzed once more against the console, a sharp vibration that made the water bottle rattle. A text from an unknown number. "We need to talk now." I didn't open it. But I knew exactly who it was. And I knew without a doubt this was only the beginning. Rachel showed up just after 4, unannounced as usual. I saw her from the kitchen window, stepping out of the passenger side of Chad's truck, smoothing her coat and checking her reflection in the side mirror. Her boots clicked all the way to the front porch like punctuation. I opened the door before she knocked. "There she is," she said with a brightness that didn't quite touch her eyes. "Hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." I stepped aside. "Of course not." She walked in like it was her house, shrugging off her coat and tossing it over the back of the armchair. Her perfume, a sharp citrus that always made Sophie sneeze, filled the room almost immediately. "God, I'm exhausted," she said, flopping onto the couch. "This week has been non-stop. Sophie's been a total handful. Hormones, I guess. I swear, sometimes I think she tries to push every single button just to see if I'll lose it." She looked at me like I was supposed to laugh. I didn't. "I keep telling Chad we need to be on the same page, but he's so passive," she continued, waving a hand. "Honestly, it's always me dealing with everything, always has been." I moved to the kitchen and turned the kettle on. I wasn't planning to make tea, but I needed the motion. Rachel sighed and crossed her legs. She rolled her eyes at me in front of Mrs. Hale yesterday. I mean, seriously, and of course that woman looked at me like I'd slapped her. "The school is ridiculous lately, probably some nosy staffer thinking they're a child psychologist." My hand paused on the ceramic canister of loose-leaf mint. "Which staffer?" I asked, voice even. She shrugged, flipping her hair. "Some aide or secretary or, I don't know, they always think they know better than the parents. Maybe if they had kids of their own, they'd shut their mouths." The kettle clicked off. I poured water into the cup, but I didn't add the tea. I just watched the steam rise, curling in the afternoon light. She hadn't noticed I hadn't brought her a cup, or maybe she had and chose not to say anything. From upstairs, a soft vibration came through, my phone resting on the counter. One message. I swiped it open. "Sophie, can I sleep over?" No emojis, no punctuation, just that. I typed back one sentence. "Yes, don't bring a bag." Rachel launched into another story, something about Chad forgetting to sign a permission slip and Sophie lying about it. Her voice was tight beneath the chatter, the kind of tone people use when they're trying to convince themselves they're in the right. I nodded once or twice but didn't add anything. That was always my role with Rachel, witness, not participant, her audience of one. I picked up the untouched tea and walked to the sink, pouring it slowly down the drain. Behind me she laughed. "God, I must be boring you to tears. I'm rambling." "You're tired," I said without turning around. She sighed dramatically. "I'll grab Sophie and get out of your hair. She's probably been sulking upstairs this whole time. Honestly, if I didn't love her so much." I turned around, letting the silence stretch. She trailed off, finally catching the lack of agreement in my eyes. "Well," she said, forcing another smile, "thanks for the chat, Mom." "Of course." She headed toward the stairs, but I stepped in front of her. "I'll get her." Rachel's brows lifted just slightly, but she didn't argue. Upstairs, I found Sophie sitting cross-legged on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, arms around her knees. Her backpack was zipped and leaning by the wall. She looked up at me, unsure. "You're staying here tonight," I said gently. "Your mom's tired and you need rest." Sophie nodded once, her shoulders dropped just a little. When we came downstairs, Rachel was checking her reflection in the mirror by the door. "She's just staying tonight," she said without looking at me. "Of course," I replied. She kissed Sophie's head quickly, more gesture than affection, and left without another word. I locked the door behind her. Sophie sat silently at the table while I reheated the casserole from last night. The weight in the air had shifted, not gone, but acknowledged. After dinner, she pulled a blanket over herself on the couch and fell asleep with a pencil still in her hand. I watched her chest rise and fall, steady now, safe for tonight. I picked up my phone and texted Deputy McClure. "She's here. I think she's starting to understand what this means." I stared out the window, night pressing in around the edges of the house. Tomorrow, Rachel would notice the difference. But by then, it would already be too late. Sophie was already awake when I came downstairs the next morning, though she hadn't turned on a single light. She was curled up on the edge of the couch, knees pulled to her chest, the gray blanket bunched around her shoulders like armor. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet I used to think meant peace. I set a bowl of oatmeal on the table, added a splash of milk the way she liked it, and left it there without a word. She didn't move at first, but a few minutes later I heard the spoon gently tap the bowl. We didn't talk while she ate, we didn't need to. When she finished, she stood, folded the blanket over the back of the couch, and walked to the stairs. "Can I grab something from my room?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "Of course," I said, keeping my voice even. She disappeared upstairs for a few minutes. When she came back down, he was holding something behind her back, a book, I realized, spiral-bound. The cover was bent and soft at the edges, its corners worn to fuzz. She didn't say anything, just held it out like she wasn't sure whether to trust me with it. I took it gently. The cover had no title, no name, just a pale smear of watercolor and faint pencil marks. I opened to the first page. A girl, small, drawn in thick black ink, hunched in the center of a large, empty room. No windows, no door. The next few pages followed her, always alone in different corners, sometimes sitting, sometimes curled on the floor, sometimes just standing, staring at nothing. The lines were tight, almost angry in places. The color was sparse, mostly gray, with jagged streaks of red or orange bleeding in at the edges. One drawing made my chest tighten. A woman stood over the girl, mouth wide open, arms raised mid-yell. Her hair was bright red scribbles, messily slashed over her face like flames. The girl was drawn smaller than ever, crouched in the lower corner of the page, hands over her ears. I turned the page. This one was quieter, a single figure pressed against a window. On the other side, the same tiny girl watching. The window was labeled in neat, printed letters, "Me." I stopped there. I didn't need to see more. I looked up. Sophie stood perfectly still, arms wrapped around herself like she was waiting for judgment, or worse, disbelief. "Can I keep this for a while?" I asked gently. She nodded. "You can have it. Do you want me to show it to someone?" She hesitated, "Like the police." "Like someone who can help," I said. Her voice dropped to something so fragile I almost missed it. "Just don't let her see." "I won't," I said. She nodded again, eyes not leaving the sketchbook. "I'll be in the kitchen," I said, "whenever you're ready." She went to the living room and sat by the window again, tracing shapes in the condensation with her finger. I took the sketchbook to the back room, closed the door, and laid it flat on my scanner. Each page felt heavier than the last. I didn't rush. I date-stamped the files, backed them up twice, once on my laptop, once on the external drive I kept hidden in the closet with my financial records. When I finished, I wrote a short email to Dana. Subject line: Evidence, Sophie M. Attached 18 scanned images. In the body, I wrote only this: "She gave it to me without asking what I'd do with it. That says everything." I hit send, then I sat there a long time, hands resting on the cover of the sketchbook. After a while, the door creaked open. Sophie stood there, her voice barely audible. "Please don't make me go back." I nodded and opened my arms. She came to me slowly, then all at once, clinging tight, burying her face into the side of my sweater like she had when she was 5. Her shoulders shook, but no sound came out. I held her as tightly as I dared, my own throat thick with something I couldn't swallow down. "I'm not," I whispered. "You're here now, that's all that matters." Outside, the wind had picked up. I could hear it pressing against the windows like something trying to get in. But in that moment, I knew we'd already started to lock the doors behind us. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake on the couch where I could hear Sophie breathing softly from the guest room down the hall, the small steadiness of it anchoring me. Around 2 a.m., I finally sat up, turned on the lamp, and opened my laptop. There were too many variables I couldn't control, too many ways this could be twisted, dismissed, minimized. I'd seen it happen to students so many times, the burden of proof placed on the smallest shoulders. Not this time. I ordered a compact voice recorder, same kind teachers used years ago for tracking meetings. Overnight delivery. It arrived just after breakfast. I slipped it beneath the hallway side table near the front door, angled toward where voices echoed most clearly. A small precaution, I told myself. Just in case. By noon, the sky had turned the color of dirty cotton, low and heavy with impending rain. Sophie sat at the kitchen table, sketching quietly today, flowers instead of dark rooms. The shift made something warm and unsteady bloom in my chest. Then tires screeched outside. Sophie froze, the pencil in her hand stopped mid-stroke. I stood up slowly, walking toward the front window just as a car door slammed hard enough to make the glass tremble. Rachel. She was already storming up the walkway, hair flying wild around her face, mascara smudged at the edges. She didn't knock, she pounded both fists, shaking the frame. Open the door, Elaine, open this damn door. Sophie slid off her chair, disappearing under the kitchen table in one fluid movement, silent and practiced, like she'd done it before. My hand found the phone in my pocket, but I didn't dial, not yet. I opened the door only once the recorder light blinked red. Rachel shoved the door wider, stepping halfway inside without waiting. Her face was FL. Ushed breath coming in short, ragged bursts. You don't get to steal my daughter, she spat. Do you hear me? You don't get to turn her against me because you're lonely and bored and desperate to matter to someone. Her voice was raw, too loud, too sharp, filling every corner of the house. Behind me, I heard Sophie's breath catch. I didn't steal anything, I said quietly. Rachel laughed, a jagged, humorless sound. She's my child, mine, you don't get to. Her voice cracked, and for a split second I saw something unguarded, panic. Then it hardened again. You're manipulating her, she hissed. You're poisoning her, I swear to God, if you don't let her leave with me right now. She moved forward like she might push past me. I stepped into the doorway, blocking her. Not today. For a moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was Rachel's ragged breathing and the recorder's soft, steady blink. She leaned closer, voice low and shaking. You have no idea what you've started. No, I said, I do. Her eyes flickered, not fear but recognition. She knew something had shifted, something irreversible. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed back to her car, slamming the door hard enough to set off the horn. The tires screeched again, leaving black streaks on the pavement. I closed the door, turned the lock, exhaled. Under the table, Sophie crawled out slowly, her small hands shaking. I knelt down so we were eye level. You're safe, I said, I promise. She nodded, but her lips were pressed tight, white at the edges. It would take time for that to become belief. That afternoon, I drove to the sheriff's station again. This time, I didn't sit in the lobby. Dana brought me straight back, listening to the recording through headphones, arms folded, jaw locking tighter with each second. When she finished, she looked up at me. We need to talk to Sophie formally, she said, soon. The room felt smaller, my pulse thudded in my ears. I nodded. Tell me what you need. She softened then, just slightly. You're doing exactly what you should, Elaine. But I didn't feel righteous. I felt tired, weighted, determined. On the way home, I stopped at the store, moving slowly, deliberately, choosing items without thinking about price or brand. A new pair of soft cotton pajamas, lavender-colored, a toothbrush with a blue handle, shampoo made for sensitive skin. Items for someone staying longer than one night. The cashier smiled gently as she bagged them. I wondered what she saw in my face. That evening, I received an email notification from Sophie's school. Routine alerts, usually upcoming events, supply reminders, but this one was different. Confidential student services meeting scheduled. It had been forwarded quietly, discreetly. And it meant Rachel had no idea what was coming. I picked up my phone and stared at the screen, pulse steady now. Tomorrow, someone from child services would visit the school. And everything would change. The summons arrived on a Thursday, folded neatly in a white envelope, hand-delivered by a process server who barely met my eyes. I thanked him anyway. He looked surprised. Inside, notice of an emergency custody review hearing 3 business days from now. I didn't call Rachel, I didn't need to, she'd read the papers soon enough. The next morning, I stepped out onto the porch to water the mums and found Monica standing at the end of the walkway, holding a travel mug and wearing the expression of someone bracing for weather. "I brought coffee," she said, "felt like today might need it." Before I could answer, a car pulled up fast, Chad's. Rachel burst out before it had even fully stopped, one heel catching in the gravel as she stumbled forward, face flushed and furious. "You sent court papers," she barked, storming up the porch steps. "Are you serious?" I stepped aside. "Monica, would you mind?" Monica didn't hesitate. She stepped between us, calm and unmoving. "Elaine's not available right now." Rachel blinked like she wasn't used to being blocked. "You're not even, this doesn't concern you." "I think it does," Monica said, "and either way you can take it up with the judge." Rachel stared at me, her voice dropped to something low and sharp. "You're not going to win this." "I'm not trying to win," I said, "I'm trying to protect her." 3 days later, I sat in a beige courtroom under flickering fluorescent lights, the same folder in my lap, the same breath held tight in my chest. Sophie wasn't here, thankfully, just the lawyers, the judge, Chad, and Rachel in a blazer too tight across her shoulders. The sketchbook sat on the evidence table, sealed in a clear bag. The audio file had already been reviewed by the court clerk. I'd watched the judge's eyebrows draw together as he read Dana's report word by word. Rachel's attorney tried to discredit me, suggested I was interfering with parental rights, that I was projecting unresolved maternal grief. I let the words pass over me like weather. When it was my turn to speak, I stood without shaking. "I'm not trying to take her," I said. "I'm trying to protect her from what I ignored for too long." Chad didn't speak until prompted. Even then, it was brief. "I don't want to fight anyone," he said, eyes fixed on his folded hands, "but I can't pretend I didn't see what I saw." The judge asked no questions, just wrote something down and looked up slowly. "Temporary custody is awarded to Ms. Elaine Masters," he said, "pending final review." Rachel gasped like the air had been punched from her. The gavel fell. In the silence after was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. The voicemail came at 2:11 a.m. I didn't hear it until morning, my phone face down on the nightstand, Sophie asleep down the hall with a new stuffed bear she'd picked out at the thrift store, the tag still on. The bedroom was cold when I woke. I pulled the quilt tighter, clicked the phone screen, and saw the missed call. One voicemail, 52 seconds. I listened to it twice, then once more with headphones. Rachel's voice, furious and fraying around the edges. "You think you've won? You're brainwashing her. You're a lonely old woman with nothing left and you're making her your little pet project. You think you're some kind of savior. You're pathetic. You've always been pathetic." No greeting, no sign-off, just static and rage. I opened the message thread I kept with Deputy McClure and forwarded it without a word. A few minutes later, she replied. "Got it logged, it's good you saved it." Another line followed a minute later. "She's slipping, keep your recorder on, and lock your doors." I left the bedroom and padded quietly into the kitchen. Sophie was already up, seated at the table with a bowl of cereal, sketching something in a small notepad while she chewed, something soft and round this time. A dog maybe, or a cloud with eyes. She looked up and smiled a little. I smiled back. Later that afternoon, another message came in, this time from Chad, not a call, an email, polite, vague. "Hi Elaine. I was thinking maybe the three of us could sit down and talk through some of this. It's all gotten kind of overwhelming and I feel like we're getting pulled in different directions. Let me know. Chad." I stared at it for a moment before dragging it into the same folder where I kept screenshots, scanned drawings, school notes, and everything else the court might need. Then I forwarded it to Dana. She responded the same way she always did. Received, documented. Sophie started therapy that week, 2 blocks away in an old converted Craftsman with soft blue walls and a wall of plastic figurines on a low shelf. Her therapist was a woman named Marta, soft-spoken but firm, with a kindness that didn't feel performative. I waited in the car for the first 2 sessions, hands folded in my lap like I was the one being evaluated. On the 3rd visit, Marta asked me to come in. She's opening up, she said gently, and what she's describing, if even half of it is accurate, is consistent with long-term emotional neglect, conditional affection, intermittent rage. It's early still, but I'll be submitting my first set of clinical notes to the advocate and to the court. I nodded, jaw tight. She trusts you, Marta added, that's clear. In the car on the way home, Sophie leaned her head against the window, drawing hearts in the fog with her fingertip. She said I don't have to talk about everything at once, she murmured. You don't, I said, you get to set the pace. We passed a corner store with paper pumpkins taped in the window. Sophie turned her head. Can we get apple cider next time? Of course. It was the first time she'd asked for anything all week. That night, Monica came over with dinner in a foil tray and her iPad under her arm. You're not going to want to see this, she said, already sitting down, but I kind of think you should see it. She opened Rachel's public Facebook page, still active, still loud. There it was, posted 2 hours earlier. Funny how people twist stories, the lies people believe. Face with rolling eyes, I'll be telling the real version soon, and trust me, it'll hurt. Monica snorted, classy. I didn't comment, I just took a screenshot, then another. I had a folder for those too. She's unraveling, Monica said, be careful. I am, I said, so is Sophie. Monica reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Outside, wind scratched lightly at the windows. I checked the locks. Then I turned my phone screen off again and slid it into the drawer beside my chair. Because I already knew, the next message would be worse. It was still dark when I picked up the phone. I sat in the laundry room with the door closed so Sophie wouldn't hear, the hum of the dryer filling the silence like static. My fingers hovered over Dana's number for a long time. Then I pressed call. She picked up on the second ring, Deputy McClure. I didn't wait, I want to file a restraining order. There was a pause, no confusion, no hesitation, just that small, weighted silence before truth settles in. Against Rachel, Dana asked. Yes, my daughter. By noon, we were sitting side by side in her office, the afternoon sun slanting across the floor in long, clinical strips. The paperwork was longer than I expected, more detailed. Dana walked me through each page with a steadiness that never wavered. I had to write the dates, attach the voicemails, include screenshots of social media posts, photos from the house, the voice recorder logs, even a still frame from the security camera showing Rachel pounding on my door. I'm sorry, Dana said softly as she slid over the final sheet. This isn't an easy thing to do, even when it's necessary. I'm not doing it for me, I said. I know. After I signed, she gathered the paperwork and promised to submit it to the court that afternoon. You should hear back within 24 hours, but based on the evidence, I doubt they'll wait that long. That night, I stood in the hallway with a new set of motion lights still boxed beside me. The wiring instructions were small print, half rubbed off from the packaging. I'd meant to wait for someone else to do it, Monica maybe, a handyman. But I didn't. Sophie joined me halfway through. Want me to hold the flashlight, she asked. I handed it over, you sure? She nodded. We worked together in silence, the light beam steady in her hands. I tightened bolts, checked each connection twice. When the final sensor blinked to life, she smiled, barely, but it was real. Later, we programmed a new code into the front door keypad. Sophie chose the numbers herself, her birthday and mine overlapped. Now we know who belongs here, she said quietly. I kissed her hair, exactly. The next morning, a call came from the county clerk's office. Order granted, temporary, enforceable immediately. Rachel was officially barred from coming within 100 feet of my home, my work, Sophie's school, or Sophie herself. The moment I hung up, the house felt lighter, not safe, not yet, but braced. An hour later, my phone rang again, blocked number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to it anyway. Jad's voice flat, careful. I just want to say I had nothing to do with that photo getting out. I didn't even know she took it. I'm sorry this is all happening. I saved the message, then pressed call. He answered quickly, Elaine, thank you for. You're still married to her, I said, and silence is a kind of permission, Chad. He didn't speak, the line went quiet except for the sound of his breath. Take care of yourself, I said, then I hung up. That night, Sophie and I sat on the couch with mugs of warm cider and a blanket stretched between us. Outside, the new motion light flickered on, nothing but wind through the trees. Still, I checked twice. Later, I slipped the protection order into the evidence folder behind the sketchbook scans and voicemail transcripts. I shut the drawer, locked it, and turned back toward the hallway. Just as my phone buzzed again, one new message. A padded envelope, no return address, no sender, just a USB. And a note inside. One word, listen. The padded envelope sat on the table for nearly an hour before I opened it. Sophie was in the living room, curled under a blanket with a sketchbook balanced against her knees, drawing quietly while the late afternoon light thinned across the floor. I turned the envelope over in my hands, feeling the faint rectangular shape inside. No handwriting, no stamp from where it originated, just my name typed on a label, nothing more. When I slid the USB out, a note fluttered onto the table. One word, block letters, all sharp edges. Listen. My hands went cold. I waited until Sophie was settled into bed, her small nightlight flickering against the wall in soft amber waves. Then I sat at the dining table with my laptop open, the house silent except for the refrigerator hum and the distant sound of wind scraping against the siding. I plugged the USB in, breath shallow. A single audio file appeared. Our master's therapy session, MP3. The timestamp was recent, 9 days ago, before the court hearing, before the restraining order, before everything shifted. I pressed play. A crackle of static, then a woman's voice, professional, gentle. Rachel, can you tell me what's been hardest for you lately? A chair scraped sharply. Then Rachel, loud, frantic, almost unrecognizable. She always picked her over me, always, ever since she was born. Elaine loved Sophie more than she ever loved me. I was invisible. Do you know what that's like, to be the one nobody chooses? Silence from the therapist, then a softer question. Are you saying Sophie took something from you? Rachel's voice broke, splintered, rebuilt itself into something jagged and furious. She's stealing her too. She's turning everyone against me, my own mother, my husband. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. A thud, maybe a fist hitting the arm of a chair. If I can't have my daughter, then no one should. That woman ruins everything she touches. My pulse hammered. I pressed the headphones closer to my ears. The therapist's voice came in, steady, unshaken. Rachel, that isn't theft, that's rescue. Another chair scrape, aggressive, metallic, breathing harsh. Then footsteps, a door slammed, the recording cut off abruptly, the silence after it brutal and echoing. I sat there staring at the computer screen long after the audio ended. The tile beneath my feet felt cold enough to burn. Someone wanted me to hear that, someone who understood exactly what it meant. I forwarded the file to Dana with a single line. This came today, we need to talk. My phone rang less than 5 minutes later. She's unraveling, Dana said, no pretense left. This recording wasn't released legally. Someone on the inside is sending a message, maybe a therapist, maybe a clerk, maybe someone scared, but this changes everything. We need to move faster. How fast? I asked. I'm requesting an emergency fast-track, full custody determination. Sophie gets her own court-appointed advocate now. They'll want to interview her privately. I closed my eyes. She's strong enough. She will be, Dana said, especially now that we have this. After we hung up, I sat at the table, staring at the empty USB like it might speak if I waited long enough. Then I opened my laptop again and searched for something I should have looked into sooner. Long-term trauma specialists in Oregon, someone who could help Sophie heal beyond courtrooms and evidence folders. Someone with experience in generational cycles and recovery. I found one. Dr. Helen Mercer, family trauma and reunification prevention specialist. Her earliest appointment was 3 weeks out. I booked it anyway. When I closed the computer, the house was still, too still. I walked to Sophie's doorway and watched her sleep, her breathing slow and safe, one hand resting lightly on the blanket. In her hair, the nightlight glow looked almost like gold. I leaned my forehead against the doorframe. Because now I knew, the danger wasn't anger anymore. It was obsession. An obsession doesn't stop just because a judge says so. The next morning, a letter arrived in the mailbox, official seal, court stamped. Custody hearing moved up, 2 days from now. No time left. The hearing was set for 10:00 a.m., but we were seated by 9:20. Sophie sat beside her advocate, a quiet woman named Jillian with warm eyes and a notepad she didn't look away from once. Sophie clutched a stress ball in her lap and didn't speak, but her posture was different. She didn't shrink. I sat behind them, hands clasped tight, listening to the hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the gentle rustle of legal folders being rearranged in front of the bench. Rachel arrived 5 minutes before the judge, alone. She wore a sleek black dress and too much foundation painted confidence brittle at the edges. She didn't look at me, didn't look at Sophie, just stared straight ahead like it was all beneath her. Then Chad walked in. And Rachel turned, almost startled, like she hadn't expected him to come, certainly not alone, not without her. He didn't sit beside her. He sat on our side of the room. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Formalities passed like clockwork, names read, case number acknowledged, parties identified. Then the questioning began. Rachel's attorney led with accusations suggesting my home was emotionally manipulative, that I had inserted myself where I didn't belong. I kept my expression still, my hands steady. Dana's report had already been submitted. The USB had already been reviewed, so had the sketchbook, the voicemails, the therapist's notes. The facts didn't need defending. But it was Chad who changed everything. He rose when called, took the stand with both hands flat on his knees. He looked thinner than the last time I'd seen him, like stress had hollowed something out of him. The attorney asked if he supported his wife's petition. He hesitated just long enough. No, he said. Rachel's head snapped toward him. What? I don't support it, Chad repeated more firmly. I let things slide I shouldn't have. I stayed quiet to keep the peace. I thought that was safer for Sophie. I was wrong. The room held its breath. He went on, voice growing steadier. Rachel's behavior toward Sophie, it was okay. I heard the things she said. I saw how Sophie would flinch, how she'd go silent around her own mother. I didn't stop it. I didn't protect her. That's on me. Rachel stood. You're a coward. The judge held up a hand. Ms. Masters, sit down. She did, shaking, lips trembling with restrained fury. The judge turned to Jillian. Ms. Kershaw, has the child expressed a preference? Jillian glanced at Sophie. With your permission, Your Honor, she's willing to answer one question. The judge looked directly at Sophie. Do you feel safe with your grandmother? Sophie sat very still. Her voice was soft but clear. Always. That was all. The judge leaned back, nodding once, then picked up the custody report. His voice was calm, measured. This court awards full legal and physical custody of the minor child, Sophie Masters, to Elaine Masters, effective immediately. Visitation with the biological mother shall be supervised and subject to further review following the completion of court-mandated therapy and anger management. Case closed. The gavel struck. Rachel's face drained of color. She looked at me, through me, like I'd burned down something sacred, but there was no fire in me, only resolve. Sophie stood and reached for my hand without hesitation. I wrapped my fingers around hers and squeezed once. Outside, the sun had risen higher, the sky cutting clean through the clouds above the courthouse steps. I didn't cry, not there. But when we got home and I watched Sophie hang her backpack on the hook by the door like it belonged there, like she did, I stepped into the hallway, leaned against the wall, and let myself feel the weight shift. Not off of me, but away from her. We painted the room light blue. Not the pale gray blue I'd always chosen before, safe, neutral, but a bright, hopeful shade Sophie picked out herself from swatches at Home Depot. She held the card up to the light and said, "It looks like the sky if you're lying in grass." I didn't correct her, it was perfect. We laid plastic drop cloths over the carpet, wore old t-shirts, and took our time. Sophie used a small roller and insisted on doing the corners herself. Her strokes were careful, deliberate. She didn't hum or talk much, but every now and then she'd glance over at me and smile, small, certain. By the end of the weekend, the room felt like hers, not just a space she'd borrowed, not temporary. Hers. The desk held new sketchpads and jars of colored pencils sorted by hue. A small shelf displayed ceramic animals we found at a flea market: 2 owls, a fox, and something that looked vaguely like a cat, though Sophie claimed it was a lion in disguise. Above the bed we hung a corkboard, on it, a printed certificate from her youth art program's fall showcase. First place Sophie Masters before and after. The piece had stunned me. A split-frame watercolor on one side, a girl behind a locked window, everything in grayscale and rain. On the other, the same girl barefoot in a garden, hair loose, the world in color, her hands open toward the light. It hadn't needed explanation. Monica cried when she saw it. She came over with sparkling cider and a small bouquet from her garden, mums and lavender, and insisted on a proper toast. Dana joined us later with her baby strapped to her chest, a faint smear of paint on her arm from her own kitchen remodel. "It suits her," Dana said, gesturing around the room. "The blue, the quiet." "She picked it," I said, "all of it." Sophie sat on the floor with the baby in her lap, holding her with that careful tenderness kids reserve for smaller things. "Can I give her one of the foxes?" she asked me, pointing to the shelf. "Of course." That night, I filled out the guardianship application papers in the quiet hum of the kitchen. The court had granted full custody, but I wanted the rest of it made official, clear, final. No more questions about who could pick Sophie up from school or authorize a field trip or sign off on therapy. No more open doors. I dropped the packet in the mail the next morning, sealed and notarized. A declaration not just of legal standing, but of permanence. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived. Return address, R. Masters. It sat in the mailbox for an hour before I touched it. Then I walked it straight to the kitchen drawer, unopened, and slid it back under a stack of appliance manuals and outdated phone chargers. I didn't throw it away. But I didn't read it. The next morning, I scrawled "Return to sender" across the envelope and dropped it back in the outgoing mail, not bothering with neatness. Sophie never asked about it, she didn't need to. That weekend, we added more prints to the corkboard. She asked if we could frame the before and after piece and hang it in the hallway near the front door. "So when people come in," she said, "they know what kind of house this is now." "What kind is that?" She looked at me, no hesitation. "The kind you get to stay in." I nodded and picked up the frame. Because that was the difference between surviving and living. One is quiet. The other answers the door. The envelope came certified again. This time with a case number printed in bold. Rachel was suing me for intentional infliction of emotional distress. I stared at the paperwork, hands steady, breath calm, like reading the weather report for a storm already past. "She's lashing out," Monica said over coffee the next morning, "like a wasp that realizes the nest's already burning." I gave a quiet smile, more out of gratitude than amusement. "Know any good attorneys?" "I know a great one," she said, already pulling out her phone. She doesn't blink. Her name was Gina Holt. She wore dark lipstick, darker suits, and a silver chain with a key pendant that sat just below her throat like punctuation. Monica was right, she didn't blink. Not once during our first meeting. "They're not expecting you to fight," Gina said, flipping through the case file Rachel's attorney had filed. "They're hoping to outpaper you, drag it out, bleed your patience. We won't let them." "What are my options?" I asked. She looked up. "You counter, emotional harassment, attempted intimidation, maybe even defamation, depending on how public her behavior's been." "It's been public," I said, remembering the Facebook post, the voicemail, the slammed fists against my door. "Good," Gina said, her tone sharp as a clean cut. "We'll respond this week." For the next 10 days, my life split in two. Mornings were soft and ordinary: cereal bowls, rides to school, Sophie's watercolor sunsets drying on newspaper across the dining table. Afternoons were depositions, affidavits, bullet point summaries of things that should have stayed buried long ago. I handed Gina every file, every printout, every quiet piece of proof I'd been collecting for months. She took them. Without flinching. "I've handled worse," she said once, skimming through Dana's transcript, "but rarely this clean." The hearing itself lasted under 30 minutes. Rachel arrived flanked by a new attorney, young, smug, underprepared. She wore beige this time, her face drawn tight at the edges, no makeup, no mask. Gina didn't waste a single word. She laid the facts out like architecture. The recording, the court documents, the restraining order, the therapist's letter, the voicemail, the sketchbook, the timeline, the truth. Rachel's attorney tried to object, but the judge waved it off. Ms. Holt, your countersuit stands. The plaintiff's claims are unfounded and retaliatory in nature, the judge said, adjusting his glasses. This court finds no evidence of malicious intent by the defendant. On the contrary, the defendant appears to have acted consistently in the interest of a child's welfare. He turned to Rachel, voice measured but firm. Your lawsuit is dismissed. You are ordered to pay the defendant's legal fees and attend a 12-week court-approved anger management program. Compliance is mandatory. Rachel didn't speak. Didn't move. Just sat there, eyes vacant, lips pressed together like she'd swallowed something bitter and it hadn't gone down right. When the gavel struck, it sounded like punctuation at the end of a long, long sentence. Outside the courthouse, Gina shook my hand. You did everything right, she said, even when it cost you. I nodded, thank you for helping me finish it. You didn't need help, she said, you just needed backup. Rachel passed us on the steps alone. No eye contact, no fury, just a hollow shadow of the woman who once stood on my porch and screamed that I was stealing her child. She disappeared into a rideshare without looking back. I watched the car pull away, then turned to Gina. Is that it? I asked. She lifted a brow. That was it. I exhaled. But somewhere beneath that relief, buried under the calm, I could still feel it. The kind of silence that comes before a final, distant echo. I wasn't afraid. But I wasn't done listening either. I rewrote the will on a Wednesday. The lawyer's office smelled like laminate and dust, two things pretending to be permanents. I sat across from a paralegal who clicked her pen once and said, "Take your time," as if I might need to think about it. I didn't. Sophie's name went first, sole beneficiary. Everything I had, the house, the insurance, the retirement savings, tucked away in 3 different folders. But it wasn't just money. I added language for the future, a trust she could use for therapy, college, or an art grant if she ever wanted to start one. And then I added one more line. Not buried, not polite. Rachel Masters is to be excluded from all inheritance and from all contact regarding estate matters. This is permanent. This is final. The paralegal looked at me for a long moment, pen hovering over the page. You sure you want to put it in writing like that? She asked gently. I'm sure, I said, there has to be a record. That night I wrote one more letter, short, firm, sealed in an envelope with no return address. I dropped it in the mailbox before sunrise. Rachel, once you were my daughter. Once I forgave every cutting word because I believed something softer lived under it. Once I blamed myself. But not anymore. You lost your place in this family by choice, and now so do I. This is not punishment, this is the boundary you refused to draw, so I drew it for you. Do not contact me again. Elaine. When I came back inside, Sophie was still asleep, curled on her side in the room we'd painted together, the soft blue walls catching the early light like a sky that belonged only to her. On the kitchen table, under her cereal bowl, was a folded sheet of paper. I almost missed it. I would have thrown it out with the napkin if the corner hadn't caught on my thumb. I opened it slowly. 2 figures, hand-drawn in soft-colored pencil, stood beneath a wide sweep of blue. One tall, one small, their hands joined. Around them grass, sky, a tree, a dog with cartoon eyes, a sun with lashes. But it was the title that undid me. Sophie had written it in bold at the bottom, in her careful block letters. The people who stayed. I sat down right there on the floor and let myself feel all of it. The grief, the guilt, the impossible beauty of a second chance earned the long way around. When Sophie woke up and padded into the kitchen, she found the drawing already in a frame, standing on the mantel. She smiled wide and sure. You like it? I love it, I said, more than you'll ever know. She sat beside me on the floor and leaned her head against my shoulder. I think we should plant a tree, she said, one that stays even after we don't. We will, I said, we'll plant too. That afternoon, we walked the nursery rows together, fingertips brushing leaves, roots wrapped in burlap, branches ready for seasons we hadn't yet imagined. We did. And talk about Rachel. We didn't have to. Some things live behind locked doors. Others grow toward the sun. We moved in early spring before the trees fully leafed out, when the mornings still held onto frost but the afternoons began to smell faintly of earth and newness. The new house sat at the edge of a quiet neighborhood just outside Eugene. Nothing fancy, just a small single-story with soft yellow siding and a porch swing that groaned gently in the breeze, but it was ours, untouched, unhaunted. Sophie picked her room before the boxes were unpacked. She claimed the one with the south-facing window, already imagining a desk against the wall and string lights curling around the frame. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need to anymore. Her first day of high school came with nerves and a perfectly packed backpack. She joined the yearbook staff by the second week and won an underclassman award by winter break for contributions to creative identity. They spelled her name wrong on the certificate, but she laughed about it. I think I like it better this way, she said, holding it up to the fridge, more mysterious. At night, she stayed up sketching layouts and cover concepts, sometimes leaving drafts on the counter for me to find in the morning. Her margins were full of quiet doodles, birds in hats, coffee cups with wings, stars that winked. I saved every one. While she settled in, I started volunteering twice a week at a youth mentorship center in town, mostly listening, sometimes helping with homework, occasionally just sitting quietly beside a girl who didn't have anyone else to sit beside her. I saw pieces of Sophie in each of them, different shapes, same root. It felt like building something backward and forward at once, repair and prevention. In late March, Dana came to visit with her second baby bundled to her chest in soft green flannel. She sat at our kitchen table like no time had passed, a mug of chamomile in one hand and a burp cloth over her shoulder. She's named Elena, she said, smiling as the baby stirred. With an eye, I thought you might roll your eyes. I already am, I said, but my throat tightened just the same. We talked long after Sophie went to bed about cases Dana couldn't discuss, the way the world keeps turning even when it shouldn't, and the essays I'd started to write late at night when sleep wouldn't come. You should publish them, she said casually. I wouldn't even know where to start. You already started, she said, the rest is just format. 3 months later, a small collection arrived from a local press, Voices That Weren't Heard. On the first page, beneath a simple dedication, I wrote, "For Sophie, because some stories are still being written." Monica cried when she saw it. Sophie framed the title page and hung it in her new room. And for a while it was quiet. Until the envelope came. Plain, no return address, postmarked from a city I didn't recognize. I found it in the mailbox under a flyer for a local food drive and a coupon for half-price tires. I didn't open it, I didn't even bring it inside. I tore it in half by the curb and dropped it directly into the blue recycling bin. Sophie never asked. That evening, we made cinnamon toast and listened to music from her latest playlist, soft, strange harmonies that felt like another language I was learning by proximity. Outside, the wind brushed the porch swing just once. Inside, the quiet held. We didn't speak of her. We didn't need to. Because this wasn't a piece that asked permission. It was one we'd built brick by brick. And no one, not even the person who once called herself mother, was welcome inside it now. The stage lights weren't harsh, just warm enough to blur the first few rows into soft shapes. I stood at the podium with the mic adjusted low and the pages of my speech steady in my hand. The room was quiet in that reverent way only found at community events where everyone actually listens. Folding chairs filled every aisle of the little auditorium, most of them taken parents, students, volunteers, and a handful of social workers I'd come to know by first name. Dana was in the second row with baby Elena asleep against her chest, and Monica sat beside her, one arm resting on the back of the empty chair she'd insisted on saving for just in case someone needs it. I didn't need to clear my throat. I just started. I wasn't the kind of person who ever expected to speak into a microphone. I taught second grade, I collected receipts in envelopes. I believed naively maybe that being good was enough to make things turn out okay. A pause, a breath. I was wrong. Somewhere in the back a chair creaked, no one moved. One voicemail changed my life. It wasn't even meant for me. It came in the middle of the night from someone I used to love unconditionally. And when I heard it, really heard it, I made a choice. I called the police instead of her. No gasp, just silence, real silence. And I would do it again tomorrow. My voice didn't shake. I spoke for 12 minutes. About systems that fail quiet children, about what survival really looks like, about how no one thinks of grandmothers as first responders, but sometimes we are, about the difference between secrecy and protection, about one girl, one house, one room painted the color of sky. I ended with this. Sometimes safety starts with a single, accidental voicemail, if you're brave enough to listen. There was no applause at first, just stillness. Then a single clap. Then many. Then everyone stood. I didn't cry, but when I stepped away from the podium, I nearly staggered from the weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. And then she was there. Sophie ran into my arms, no hesitation, no stage fright, no teenage restraint. She buried her face into my shoulder and said, "You sounded like someone who saves people." I kissed the top of her head. "I save you, that's enough." Afterward, we packed up quickly. The auditorium emptied, lights dimmed, and Monica drove us home with leftover brownies on her lap and soft music playing through dusty speakers. When we got back, I went to the hallway closet and pulled down the old file box. Inside, the sketchbook scans, the voicemail transcripts, the photo stills, the USB, the court papers yellowing at the edges. I took out a Sharpie and wrote one word across the lid. Closed. Then I latched it, carried it to the attic, and slid it behind a box of Christmas lights and baby blankets. Sophie was in the kitchen when I came back down, already unpacking the event swag from her tote bag, brochures, a pen, a reusable water bottle with the youth center logo printed crookedly across it. Among them, tucked between two program flyers, was a packet. College Prep Class of 2028. She looked at me a little sheepish. I forgot I picked it up. I didn't say anything, just reached for it, folded it closed, and placed it beside her teacup. "Let's leave it there," I said, "just for a little while." That night, I sat in bed with my journal and wrote one final line before turning out the light. She was my daughter. But Sophie is my future. I turned off the lamp. The room held a soft blue hush, the same sky she chose. Outside, the porch swing creaked once in the breeze like punctuation. And somewhere deep in my memory, the voicemail echoed again. Not the words, just the moment it arrived. That single sharp choice. And the final truth it gave me. A voice message from my daughter came by mistake. After hearing it, I called the police instead of her. And I'd do it again tomorrow.